What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
So what I want to do here is run over the untold origin of Thor's hammer. And I'll be honest with you guys, this was an amazing story. Not only that, at the end of this video, I'm going to drop a bombshell on you guys on the reason for why I think Odin's son is not able to lift the hammer of Thor. Having said that, if you guys have been following, Jason Aaron's run so far with regards to Jane Foster Thor, the Mighty Thor, one of the things you guys may have noticed is that there's a huge learning curve, which is to say that Jane Foster isn't completely aware of what she's capable of. And this is natural. This is one of the reasons why I like Jason Aaron's run so much, because he focuses on the fact that Jane Foster doesn't really know what she's doing. She has a general idea, but all she knows is what she saw Thor do. She's never actually been Thor herself. And so when she took over the mantle from Odin's son, then it just became this instance where she was quite literally flying by the seat of her pants. In addition to this, she's always had this underlying feeling that the hammer itself was sentient. And a lot of this was because the hammer would take her to places. It wouldn't necessarily be that she would go there on her own. It would be the hammer would just take her there. And that's what happens in this particular story. After the events of the last story arc, which really aren't extremely relevant to the events of this story, Jane Foster is suddenly transported to the farthest reaches of space. Now, this is one of the cool things about Jason Aaron's run. Prior to his time on the Thor series, it was really just this idea that there was Asgard floating out in a dimension somewhere. There were other realms that were around it, but we didn't really know how deep all this stuff went. What Jason Aaron tells us is that there is, or I guess he established this in God Butcher, really, there is this sort of library, like this central place, which is kind of like the nexus where all the gods go to. So the gods of Olympus and the gods of Hindu belief systems, the gods of Asgard, and basically every single god in existence knows of this location. Now, this does not mean cosmic entities. There's a big difference in Marvel Comics between cosmic entities and gods. Whenever it is that, comic book writers, or at least in this instance when Jason Aaron's talking about gods, he's talking about the earthly and alien pantheons of gods native to those planets or races. The cosmic entities just represent aspects of the universe itself. So I just wanted to clear that up for those of you guys who are a little curious or may have been wondering this as we were going through this discussion. But because there is this giant nexus, this location, Jane Foster's learning about this for the very first time. What we're also being told is that there are thousands of gods. Now, this is in stark contrast to the events of God Butcher, whereby Gore had quite literally been traveling around the cosmos and killing off gods left and right. And so because, a lot of them are starting to crop back up again, it tells us, of course, that gods seem to be eternal, but Jason Aaron doesn't really seem to bridge this gap. But again, Jane Foster is not the main focus here. The main focus is the hammer. When she's talking to the High Lord Librarian, the person that basically keeps track of all the records of everything that has ever happened in the universe, the statement she makes here is that for her, this is all new, but at the same time, she had also felt that the hammer that she wields is sentient. Now, this is something that the High Lord Librarian always knew. He always knew this hammer was sentient because he knows the full history of it, and he actually gives it to us. What he says is that there was a point in the history of Asgard's existence whereby the trolls had waged war against the dwarves. The issue with this was that while Odin would have normally stepped away and would have just allowed this conflict to unfold naturally, as he does in some instances, the dwarves are the best craftsmen when it comes to forging raw materials into weapons or into items that can be used by other members of the 9 realms. And so for Odin, if the dwarves were to be wiped out, his ability to have weapons crafted using the very rare metals that exist on their own in their own realm, their ability to craft weapons that would be formidable in their own right would be completely and utterly lost, simply because the trolls don't have the ability to forge those kind of weapons. And so Odin had effectively stepped in, and Odin had quickly defeated the trolls and cast them out of the realm of the dwarves. In response, the dwarves thanked Odin by presenting him with a rock, with a piece of Uru metal. Now, this I want to have a discussion about, especially when it comes to Uru metal versus adamantium, because I have seen this discussion so many times. So many people ask this question: which one's stronger, Uru metal or adamantium? Well, like we talked about in my video on adamantium versus vibranium, or adamantium and vibranium, true adamantium, which is what was bonded to Wolverine's skeleton, is completely indestructible once it hardens, or at least is supposed to be. Uru metal has the ability to absorb magic, and the magic that it absorbs makes it stronger. Having said that, Thor's hammer would would not be able to break adamantium, but it would be able to put a dent in it. And we've seen that before. We've seen Thor's hammer capable of denting true adamantium, but that's about as far as it goes. But the fact remains that with the exception of adamantium, Thor's hammer, this Uru metal, is one of the most durable, strongest, and magic sensitive metals out there in existence right now. And so with it being presented to Odin, this is basically the dwarves presenting him with the absolute best gift they can possibly offer, the rarest and strongest material in existence. Now, what Jason Aaron does is he transitions to the other side of the cosmos, and he tells us that there was this storm lingering on the horizon. Now, this is really Jason Aaron being a little I guess meta-y. I don't know if that's really a word that I can use. This is Jason Aaron not really being specific, which is to say, this isn't really like the storm representing an individual. The storm's not a being. The storm is simply just a storm, but he gives it personality. And what he says is that this storm had been lingering on the horizon, and it had been making its way across the cosmos, wiping out planets, destroying galaxies, and eventually it set its sights, I guess it made its way over to Asgard. And so by providing this storm with personality, Jason Aaron is basically telling us that this storm's intended to completely obliterate Asgard. Now, because Odin has the Odin Force, which is the life force of his two brothers, Vili and V, which he's combined into himself to make him durable, Odin is extremely powerful in his own right. And because of this, Odin used the combined force of the Odin Force itself against this storm. While he was able to hold it at bay, his energies were able to send the storm into a fray, send it into a swirl, and Odin took the Uru metal that he was given by the dwarves and confined the storm inside of it. And so with this storm confined, Odin's idea was that if this storm is so powerful that it's capable of wiping out entire solar systems and galaxies and so on, then this storm can basically be forged, or this rock can be forged into a weapon that Odin can use. And so what he did is he went to the dwarves and he said, craft me a weapon out of this chunk of Uru metal with a storm inside so that I can have a weapon that none can challenge, a weapon that no one can stand against. And so what happened is that because Uru metal was almost impossible to mold, because it was almost impossible to craft, it presented one heck of a challenge for the dwarves. But over the course of 17 days, combining the efforts of thousands of dwarves all working together, they were eventually able to mold this chunk of Uru metal into a hammer. And the hammer itself was presented to Thor as the pinnacle of any weapon that would ever exist within the 9 realms. The issue with this was that the storm inside the hammer was still raging, it was still wildly powerful, and it seemed to have a mind of its own. And so the result of this is that when Odin went to go pick up the hammer, he was unable to wield it effectively because the hammer was wild. It basically took Odin where it wanted to go, and Odin couldn't keep it confined. And so what Odin did is he came along and he put an enchantment on the hammer that said anybody who picks it up, or anybody who tries to pick it up, will not be able to lift it. Now, Jason Aaron doesn't tell us what this enchantment is. He does not tell us if it's the enchantment that he made where he said, those who are worthy will possess the power of Thor, or if it was a different enchantment. I would go as far as to say, especially with what we see here with his younger, with his firstborn Thor being curious about the hammer, knowing Thor would go on to lift it, it was basically a precursor to that particular enchantment, so that Odin was able to come back later on and modify it and saying that anyone, those who prove themselves worthy will be able to possess the hammer of Thor. But again, we're not given any specifics here. All we really know is that Odin put an enchantment on this hammer so that nobody could wield it. But it seemed as though because the hammer was sentient, because of the fact that the storm inside could decide who was able to wield it and who was not able to wield it, that the hammer decided Thor would be able to wield it, so that when Thor, came of age, he was able to pick up the hammer and carry it around and use it as a superhero. Having said that, because of the fact that the hammer in and of itself seems to be sentient based on what it is that we're told, while the events of this comic basically conclude going forward into the upcoming story as part of Marvel Now called The War of Realms, presumably leading into Thor the Unworthy and the return of Odin's son, the big huge bomb that I want to drop here is with regards to what it was that Nick Fury said to Thor. Now, as we know in Original Sin, the Original Sin event that Marvel did as part of their lead up to Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and the events of Secret Wars, the incursions and so on, during a conflict with Nick Fury, it was always assumed that Nick Fury had said something to Thor that made it impossible for him to lift the hammer. It made him unworthy. I would make the argument that it's not because Nick Fury said something to Thor that kept him from lifting the hammer. I think Nick Fury said something to the hammer that made it so that Thor couldn't pick it up. That's my take on this, that Nick Fury spoke to the hammer and the hammer decided Thor wasn't worthy of wielding it anymore. Now, what it was that Nick Fury said to that hammer, that the principle still stays the same. What was it Nick Fury said? We don't know. And Jason Aaron may never tell us. I have no real idea here, but it seems as though he's moving in that direction, that he is going to tell us what it is that, Nick Fury said that kept Odin's son from being able to wield the hammer. Most likely it'll be covered in Thor the Unworthy. At least I would hope so. If it is, you'll definitely hear from me. If it's not, well then I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I'll do a video on Thor the Unworthy when that storyline completes, but it'll be 6 months before that happens. But, or at least assuming it comes out as a monthly series, it'll be 6 months. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Core. And yeah, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about Jason Aaron modifying the history of Thor's hammer to make it sentient, to make it something that can actually think for itself, as opposed to just being wielded, being an object that's lifted by whoever's worthy of picking it up. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.